Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO of As Good as Gold Australia. And this morning, once again, I'm joined by my brother Brian.
Thank you, Darryl.
Partner at As Good as Gold. And today we interview David Morgan from the Morgan Report, an advisor to As Good as Gold Australia. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Good morning to you too, David.
What a wonderful day it is. David, lots to talk about again, and really looking forward to the chat. However, before we do that, what I'd like to do is just mention briefly the promo that we introduced last week. That was the ability to be able to buy gold at spot. We broke all the rules, didn't we, Brian?
Yep.
I mean, I tried to buy gold at spot for 20 years as a client, never successful.
Never worked.
Right?
No.
And we broke the rules last week. We broke the shackles and provided that opportunity, and we had a terrific response, and
Absolutely.
so over the moon about the response from the US and from our Canadian friends. And so what we thought we would do is do it again, and this time lengthen the time span, because we had some people who said they were a little disappointed because they missed out on the opportunity because we didn't run it forever, but we've decided that we would increase that time span this time, and we'll run it right up until the end of the month. So here's how it works. Everyone knows, or we should know now, that we have opened in Canada, open for business in Canada and the US. So you can now go to our website at www.asgoodasgoldoz.com.au and click on the international link. That'll take you over to the products that are available to ship within the United States and Canada. So how does this promo work? So all you have to do is place an order online for 50 silver coins. Now they're coins of your choice. So they could be silver kangaroos, silver maples, Britannias. That's your choice. But once you've added them to the cart, you go back to the international product page and order a gold coin from the same exact mint as the silver coins. So, for example, if you'd purchased 50 silver kangaroos, the object then would be to place an order on a gold kangaroo. Now, once that's been added to your cart, you'll find the price will automatically drop down to spot. So once again, this runs till the end of the month. So Brian, unheard of.
No.
Unheard of.
I wish I was around when I started buying 23 years ago.
So here's your opportunity, guys, to buy gold at spot. If you're thinking that these products may have to be shipped from Australia, that is not correct. Once the goods are shipped and they're shipped from Las Vegas, it'll only be a 2 or 3 day turnaround before you receive them at your door. So knowing that, David, would you like to pass a comment on that?
Darryl, I certainly would. Let me just say that I don't want anyone to miss this opportunity, so I'll get the details. I'll put it on my free list. I think there's like 55,000 on there, mostly U.S. and Canadians. They're worldwide, but primarily U.S. and Canadians. So we'll get the details. We'll send it out to everybody. So if you missed what Darryl Brian said right at the start, don't fear. If you're on the free list at themorganreport.com, we will send it to you a couple times before the month ends. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
David, on the economy, as we speak, the global economy is deteriorating at an ever-increasing rate. No other word to describe it. Here in Australia, in the state of New South Wales, we remain in lockdown. The city of Melbourne continues to be in lockdown. They've had something like 200 days of lockdown since COVID started. Businesses, these are the two most populated states and cities in Australia. Businesses are closing down by the thousands. They're open one day and close the next. Businesses cannot function productively in this manner. Now, our government tells us that businesses are, after this is all over, the businesses are going to get back to normal. They will not. What is interesting, of course, is none of the people that are saying that businesses will get back to normal have ever been in business. This is a really strong point. They do not qualify to make that statement. For those businesses that do survive, David, through some form of miracle, and that's the way I read it, production is clearly down, the cost of goods go up, so do unemployment numbers, wages remain stagnant at best, governments ramp up the printing presses to support the millions in need. That's here in Australia, and the US isn't faring any better. They used to be the world's biggest creditor, and now they're the world's biggest debtor. And they hold reserve currency status. An economist here in Australia, and we know this gentleman well, Vern Gowdy, Brian, said there's only one way to go broke, and that's to have too much debt. So people are thinking at the moment that governments are going to be able to save them. But they can't because they're broke. Governments are broke. The only access they have to currency is through a printing press that's working overtime. Consumer outlook for the economy in the US is at its gloomiest since 2011, according to a monthly survey from the University of Michigan. David, I see no other way out of this than massive debasement of currency and much higher levels of inflation. I know it's not a good view, but I'd like your views on this. Would you like to add to that?
Well, it's hard times ahead. There's little doubt. If we just for a moment just do like a thought experiment and just take currency out of the whole equation, just for a moment, and think about the productive capacity of a given nation state or a city or a county, how much wheat is grown, how much lumber is milled, how many automobiles are produced. The whole world on aggregate is contracting. There's less and less in almost all arenas. And often it's not because of the willingness to produce more or grow the business. It's a function of labor and a function of the interconnectedness of everything. I think the semiconductor shortage is probably one of the best examples that most people are familiar with. To think something as small as a semiconductor made almost exclusively in Taiwan is a requirement to finish an automobile in the United States. And until you get those little chips, you really can't sell the automobile or the truck. And this shows you the vulnerability of a complex society. Now let's put currency back in the equation. There's more money, I use the word money loosely, in currency trading on a daily basis than anything else in the financial markets. And this is because of the instability of the system at large. This is why, for example, when you do a wire transfer, that although it could be done really in milliseconds, it takes 2 or 3 days because the bank is going to hold it overnight so they can load it in the overnight repo market and make interest on your money or what you think is your money. So I digress. So Darryl and Brian, the problem becomes worse and worse because it's a function of not only printing too much or too much debt, it's also that the system starts to break down for supply chain, the shipping cargo container problems, people being backed up, at these ports, the labor shortage in certain areas because, people that get free money that's more a higher amount than what they get when they're actually working are not motivated to go back and get a job. And all these things contribute. And in the meantime, I think we need to look really hard at what's the most important for us as a species: food, and energy and water. So on the food front, here in the States, we're being inundated with meat bad and fake meat's good. All kinds of weather problems, crop failures, and droughts. So it's very clear that the food supply worldwide is decreasing, and the meat supply is decreasing. And yet the powers that be are giving us ideas about how to overcome this with a substitution that is questionable at best. On the waterfront here in the States, with the Lake Powell, I believe is the right one, that produces power for major metropolitan areas such as Las Vegas, is right at the tipping point, if I read the latest news blurb correctly, where they are not really having enough water in that reservoir to produce the power required. So it's right in that range, if I read it correctly. So there's all kinds of problems in addition to the major one, as you outlined, and that's the debt problem. So what happens? Fear. Fear is what happens. And when people are under fear, they don't use logic, they use emotion. An emotional decision, if you've ever made one, is non-rational. And because it's based on fear, it's usually not the best choice. But you don't know that at the time because it's a reaction rather than something that you can really contemplate and come to a good conclusion. And I think this is where we're going with the currency system. I think we're going to get to the point, or we're approaching it quickly, where there's fear, and fear is universal. It doesn't set itself aside based on your intellect, your job position, what government you're associated with. It's universal amongst the human race. And what I make that point is because the bankers could be as scared out of their wits as the guy whose ATM machine doesn't service his card anymore. And that's kind of a good metaphor, because once the trust is broken in the currency system, because you can't get it, or when you do get it, it doesn't purchase anything, we have a real panic. And we're approaching that. And I don't want to make it, let's say, that doggone David Morgan's been saying the same damn thing for so damn long. I can't stand to listen to him anymore. You know, I get it. It's the boy who cried wolf. I get it. I understand that. I've been there. I've been talking this for a long time. But if you go back and, Michael Burry, who's known for writing, doing The Big Short, he refers to this book. And this book talks about it, as many in my bookshelf behind me, of you get to that point of no return. The bankers won't tell you. In fact, they're going to lie, as they have done. That's my word, not theirs, but they're going to tell you it's under control. Inflation is temporary. If it gets out of hand, we know what to do. All that's a lie. They don't have a choice. At this point, there isn't much they can do other than lie about it and pretend that everything is okay. It's beyond that point now. And that's why I know Brian's got some really good points to bring up later in this discussion, that really, let's say, the brain trust of truth in the financial system that are willing to speak it, understand that there are only a few precautions that can be achieved where you actually have some financial protection above and beyond what's considered ordinary, which would be the sacrosanct sovereign debt of a given nation state, i.e. the US, for most people. It's true until it's not true. Right now, you couldn't pay me to own a bond.
Yeah. Yeah, well, see, unfortunately, you mentioned the word lie a moment ago. I think that mainstream media tells a lot of them. Government officials tell a lot of them. I was listening to a report the other day, or an interview, in fact, that got cut short. And one of our leading ministers over here in Australia would not allow the conversation to continue. And the question was really being directed at the leading epidemiologist of that state. And he said, she cannot take any more questions because she has been working an 18-hour day. She's working, plural, she's working 18-hour days. And I thought to myself, 18 hours, surely that doesn't include going to work and coming back from work. It doesn't include eating time. It doesn't include any of that. It doesn't include showering time. If you add it all that up, it's another 4 hours a day. What does that leave her to sleep, Brian? 2 hours. 2 hours. Now, if you've been working 18-hour days, that means you're getting 2 hours sleep. And you can only do that, I believe, for 5 or 6 days and you're dead. And this gentleman was the health minister for Australia, Brad Hazzard. Now, he should have known better. But the point I'm leading to is this, that if you tell a lie once, you've got to ask the question, how many other times does that person tell a lie? And we're being told lies all of the time. Brian and I sat with a gentleman the other day, the son of our lifetime mentor, Peter Daniels, Graham Daniels. And I asked him what he saw of the future. And he said, there is no way that we can avoid a total collapse of the economy. It's gone too far. It's beyond that now. And it's all based on the fact that mainstream media, government officials are telling lies. And we are doomed in the process.
Thank you, Darryl.
Mind you, that I will say this, that there is an answer to this, and a very positive answer. And we'll speak about that in a moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just add on to that, Brian, I don't want to cut in, but it's burning at me. So what you just said brings to mind one of the biggest interviews I had on mainstream financial television years ago, when gold had just broken the $1,000 price in the United States. And this was one of the only interviews I did where I had like a pre-interview by, I guess, the station manager or the producer. And they asked me 3 or 4 questions. They took notes. And it was my understanding it was going to be a one-on-one interview, the Financial Channel host and me. It turned out it was a conglomeration of 2 or 3 other people and myself and the interviewer, and that was fine. And they did, with the pre-interview, they were able to spin it really well. And so they just right off the gun made me kind of look like a fool. And of course, wasn't much I could do about it. I saw what had happened. I swallowed hard. And then, of course, they brought someone else in. But here's the gist of the whole thing. I saw an opportunity to save myself, so I interjected. I could tell it was winding down, that gold was not nearly in any kind of a bubble at $1,000 per ounce. It would have to achieve a minimum of $2,500 an ounce to be equivalent to the $850 it held in 1980. And the only thing that's in a bubble right now is the bond market. However, before I could get out the word bond, I was cut off on the channel because they have about a 3-second delay, and they claimed technical difficulties. So I bring that up for a couple of reasons. The contrast between the truth and the willingness of the mainstream financial press in a lot, I'll say in most cases. That's my experience. You can argue with me. That's exactly my experience. Not just this one incident, by the way. Over and over and over again, they produce a lot of fake news. They mislead people. they give them the idea of what's secure, which is insecure. Yep. Something like gold that's eternal. Eternal. Think of any money that you know of that's eternal when every currency on the planet has failed. And yet somebody like me that makes that statement's a crackpot. And when I tell the truth about the only thing that's in a bubble is the bond market, not the gold market, and I'm cut off. And thanks for letting me go there. And Brian, thanks for holding your water for me, because it really kind of pisses me off when I think about it. But that's what happened. So, Brian, I'm very anxious to hear what you have to say, but I just had to get that out. Thank you.
Well said, David.
I have no problem listening to you, David, because it's always the fact. To just move on, I must admit I read one of Jim Rickard's books. In fact, I have all of his books. But one of them mentioned the fact that he was in Italy at this stage, and he was sitting down at the table with a very wealthy family, and he asked the lady of the family there that how did they accrue so much wealth and for so long a time. So the story basically went 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which was 1/3 land, 1/3 precious metals, and 1/3 in fine art. And this had been accrued from the 12th century. The 12th century. Not in the last 5 years, but 12th century. So my next piece of information, David, is about the country of India. And we're talking about having gold as a backup, all right? Or, in other words, having gold as money, not currency as we see today. In India, 75 years ago, they achieved their independence. The price of a 10-gram gold bar was 88 rupee. All right, doesn't matter the value of the rupee, it was just 88. All right. That now has gone to 48,000 for the same 10-gram gold bar. That's an increase of 54,000% return. So 75 years ago, your grandpa put away 10 grams of gold in India, and he paid 88 rupee, and now that is fetching now 48,000 rupee, which is 54,000%. The interesting fact that there was a couple of decades that it really got moving. 71 to 81. We all know 71 is when we went up the gold standard, wacko. So no reason why gold doesn't go up. But between 71 and 81, it went up 9 times in India. Then between 2001 and 2011, it went up 6 times. And of course, 2011 to 2021 today, it's gone up double from that point of 10 years ago. But 54,000 times, even in the last 60 years, right up to now. So if we go back 60 years, it's up 48,000%, or 480 times what you paid for it 60 years ago. So what I'm trying to say here is that I do get quite a few people to say, when's it going to go up? What do you think it's going to be worth in 2 years' time? It's a fair enough statement, but I would say this is my answer always. You always have to keep your gold ready for the fact that, yes, the gold is money, and the only time to use your money if there's a better asset there to buy. Right at this point of time, having dollars in the bank does not cut any ice. The dollars in the bank keep on going down, lost 98% since they were invented in 1913 with the Federal Reserve. So, David, on that little subject, any comments?
Really not much. I mean, you did such an excellent job. I just say from 1971 to 1980, in the U.S., gold prices increased in U.S. dollar terms about 25 times. Also, I'd like to point out on India, which is very interesting on the silver side, and that is that last year, the largest purchases of silver were made in modern times, meaning that the retail market purchased about 200 million ounces, and the institutional side purchased over 300 million ounces for a total, I think it was 520 million ounces of silver. And I get asked again and again and again, where did all the silver come from? And that's pretty hard to know. But what I want to elucidate the listeners with is that silver was at an all-time high in rupees. We had the illness. We had all that goes along with that. And so when you see the currency and you need to eat or pay something off or whatever, and you see your savings, which many of the Indian population save in silver, at an all-time high, and you need it, you can see that a great deal of turnover went into the silver market on the sell side. On top of that, the way I can make that rather bold statement is that the silver imports into India in 2020 were basically at an all-time low. So it was a net exporter of silver. And this is, unfortunately, in my opinion, strong one, that we have to settle in currency. In other words, I call it the bankers, I call it the bankers' last vestige of hope. But in reality, everyone is trained to take the currency only. In other words, we don't, use a gold coin or silver coin standard anymore, where I could go in with my, 1/10 of an ounce of silver and buy, 5 cups of coffee or whatever, right? I have to convert it to the currency of that nation state and make my purchase or put it on my debit card or whatever. So that's just something that I, discovered because, I'm always being asked by many, like, why this and why that and what happened. And so I had to think about it a while, but that's my take. So hopefully I added something to it, but I really couldn't add on to what you said, Brian. I mean, you just nailed it. And this is what people need to hear again and again. Learning is a product of repetition. You usually don't learn your multiplication tables by doing them one time. You've got to repeat them a few times before you learn them. And it's the same thing in the financial markets. You hear about, gold is this or gold that. Gold preserves your wealth. And it's proven that during the whole time, as good as Gold Australia has been in business. But you get these whiny crybabies that buy it and it goes down in paper terms from the time they buy it. Maybe that can be a few years. I admit that. But from the longer term perspective, you want legacy wealth? You want to go back to the 12th century? You want to hold on because you have conviction and you know how the world works and you work with it instead of against it? Guess what? You keep building your wealth. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
No, thank you very much, David. I love your comments.
Yeah, no, good, strong point. And I don't know if I can add a lot to that, but I would like to, I believe, add something. And, Brian and I talk about this regularly. We believe that even gold investors, a lot of gold investors don't really understand the real value of what they've just done investing in gold. Peter Daniels, many years ago, and we refer to this man regularly, and he deserves to be given the kudos that we give him. Peter Daniels explained it so well to us when he described how governments destruct currency. And so there was no value in holding on to currency. There was no value at all. And he talked about gold, and he did it so well, and he made so much sense that for nearly 40 years now, we've known about gold, and for 30 years we've been investing in it. But I think it gets back. The other day I was speaking with a gentleman who is very wealthy and has invested very heavily into precious metals. And he said, Darryl, I've known a lot of, and I've connected with a lot of very successful business people in my lifetime. He said, what I find really interesting is that they have been successful at times in their business, but at retirement, many of them have lost that position that they once had. So people can get rich quick and lose it quickly. Precious metals, he described, as did Peter, that Precious metals were about getting rich slow. And there's a big difference between the two. So you don't want to lose it towards the end of your career because you haven't got a lot of time to replace it and get back a firm footing. So, gold is about, and you mentioned this, David, of course, preserving your wealth. And I just think the illustration that we've all been given, or should have been given, was a $35 suit that you could purchase in 1935. And an ounce of gold was also $35. Well, you think about that for a moment. So a suit at $35, today you could never purchase a suit for $35. The tie that Brian's wearing at the moment, that I'm wearing, would probably cost you more than $35. But an ounce of gold that was valued at $35 in 1935 would buy you something like a half a dozen suits today. How well has your investment been preserved? So you could have either, if you think about it this way, you could have bought a lot of suits in 1935. They would have all worn out by now. You'd have nothing to show for it. Or you could have bought a lot of gold for $35 an ounce. And what would that be worth today? You would have been getting rich slow. So gold is so misunderstood, and I believe the reason for that is that it's just not highlighted, of course, by mainstream media.
No education
at all. But it outperforms everything. Gold outperforms everything. And I've illustrated this over and over again. But $500,000 in gold, $500,000 in gold, if you just put it aside for 5 years, at its current rate of growth over the last 20 years since 2000, it would increase to have a value of $1 million. Better than that. But that's over the last 20 years. In 5 years, gold would double at the rate of 20% per annum. So here's the thing. You got $500,000, allow it to grow. 5 years later, you've got $1 million. You could liquidate at 20% per year, and you'd have more in your account at the end of the following year than you had at the beginning of it. What a position to be in. How many people are in that position at retirement today, living on $200,000 a year infinitum? And that's the position that gold can place you in. And silver, of course, could, and we believe will outperform gold over the next few years. So the opportunity is there, and it needs to be constantly promoted, because you're right, David, you've got to hear it over and over and over again before it has the necessary impact.
Having parents that were, in the Depression. My dad was born in 1930, my mom about the same time, but, being able to talk to their parents, so my grandparents, having lived through the Depression, when that happened, everyone knew what they should have, could have, might have done. And it's interesting that, the greatest lesson of history is people don't learn the lessons of history. Yeah. And I see that again, one of my mission statements really has been to be able to educate. I mean, I put my tongue in my cheek when they say silver guru, but one of the definitions of guru is teacher. If I could be a teacher of monetary history and just be calm and, and just push out what's obviously there, but so few people will take it and act on it. Some will look at it as entertainment. Some will look at it as nice to know. I'll do it when I need to do it and that type of thing. But no one that had a bank account in the 30s that had it basically null and void planned it that way. A lot of these people were one day fairly well off, stable, maybe not complacent, but trusting, or maybe too trusting, only to find out very quickly how things can change, especially in the financial system when it's based on a lie. And of course, I've said this many times, the lie is you can get something for nothing. If you think that we can print or digitize, make digital wealth on a computer screen and distribute it to the money center banks, and put it out into the system and avoid all consequences for the rest of time, you're wrong. It's never happened and it never will. And we're at that point, I believe, and don't mean tomorrow, but I mean within the next couple of years, maybe as short as 6 months, where the psychology will change and enough people will wake up. And I've used this before and I haven't used it very often, but I really suggest people look it up on the internet because I'm not really clear on if it has any real validity. So treat it as a metaphor, but it's called the hundredth monkey theory. And this purportedly is where these apes or monkeys on an island that was nuked learned, or one of them, two of them, three of them decided they had to wash the coconuts before they could eat them. And it was just a random few that did it. But once it hit that tipping point of 100 monkeys, every one of them on every one of the adjacent islands started washing their coconuts before they consumed them. Now, it sounds like a far-fetched story, and maybe it is. I'll treat it as a metaphor only. But the point is that there is enough people that say, you know what, I got to grab gold, I got to grab silver, I've got to have some protection. And by that time, all the monkeys are searching for gold, and there's only so much. So maybe corny way to end. Certainly you can have the last word, but I think that's what we're facing. We've had enough printing to completely destroy the value of the dollar. There's no doubt about that, but it still is the best currency available. There's no, little doubt about that. So what happens between now and the destruction of, the acceptance of the US dollar as final payment? What happens between now and then is that 100th monkey. That's what happens.
Interesting. David, I'm going to my last question, which is only another story, and feed it back with you. But I'm going to be talking about two investors. One is Warren Buffett, and the other one is Ray Dalio. I will bring up just a little story on Warren Buffett, a great investor who's done incredibly well through his lifetime. But the one thing that stuck in my mind, which I just don't think he elaborated on quite as accurately as he should have, but it was pushing his own wheelbarrow, and that was when he described, everybody knows Warren Buffett, great investor, and he doesn't like gold, right? But he gave a description of gold and its usefulness or non-usefulness. But he basically stated that if you put a pile of gold on the table here, a kilo of gold or 500 kilo, whatever, he's looking at it and he's looking at it and it doesn't do a thing, right? Why would anybody own gold? Doesn't do anything, it's a rock. And I thought about that statement. I thought, well, let's have a look at the other viewpoint. Let's put the same value of US dollars, right, which would be a huge amount, on the same table. You can look at it until the cows come home and it still doesn't do anything. It's when you put it to use that makes it happen, right? So gold is money. When you put it to use, things happen. When the dollars that are on that same table, when you put them to use, things happen. What you've got to work out is what risk are you going to use? What risk will you have by your investments? So that brings me to Ray Dalio, a quote that he did about 5-6 years ago when I wrote this down. He said, if you do have an excellent analysis of why you shouldn't have such an allocation to gold between 5 and 10%, we'd appreciate you sharing it with us. What he meant was, and what he said, we believe that a portfolio has got to have some gold in it if you want to have an asset base that's it's not going to go down with the ships. So he's saying 5 to 10%. So I look at Ray Dalio and a probably net worth of around 18 billion. So he probably's got around that 1.8, maybe 1.6, 1.8 billion in gold. All right, it's not a pet rock. He's got it there for one reason. He's probably one of the most top 5 stock market investors in the world. And I believe he's saying that gold is a low risk investor insurance, right? My point here is that if you're going to invest money into whatever business or whatever investment you see as a good idea, before you do that, why would anybody have their currency in anything but gold or silver while you wait for the right opportunity to spend it? Why would you have it in any US dollars, Australian dollars, English pounds when it's going down by 97%, 98% over the last 100 years? Why would you have it in that? Why not? Why wouldn't you put it in gold? Your comments, David.
Well, first of all, you hit it out of the park, Brian. Really, really well done. And that's what I advocate. Your savings should be in precious metals, real money, not in the phony baloney fiat. On top of that, a couple comments on Buffett. I wrote a booklet called Warren Buffett and Silver, and I lost it, unfortunately. And it just was a super success. It's kind of when I started on the speaking circuit. And I talked about Howard Buffett being a senator. He was very much an honest money advocate, very unlike his son, Warren, which most people don't know that. The other thing about Buffett and gold that really kind of gets my craw a bit is that he loves silver, but no one ever asked him, you don't like gold, but you bought silver. I mean, a good journalist would say, Warren, I get it. You think it's a pet rock. So why do you like silver? But no one ever confronts him on that, right? But he did. And he, bought 129.7 million ounces off the COMEX when it was at the inflation adjusted low price in all of recorded history. Buffett's a value investor. And what's interesting is that he bought so much, they couldn't deliver the whole thing. Out of the approximately 130 million ounces, they only delivered 90 million. So the dealers were on the hook for about 40 million. If you look at lease rates during that next 2 years before, in my view, they finally got them the last 40 million ounces, and it probably wasn't all at once, it was in tranches. The lease rates were very high, up to like 17%. And then when they paid it off, the lease rates went back down to practically nothing. He also stored that silver in London. And then the SLV was started with 130 million ounces. Now, I know everything that I just said is probably just a mere coincidence. The fact that it was 130 million ounces, the fact that it took about 2 years to get it fully, the fact that it left the United States primarily and went over to London, the fact that the SLV was started in London by JP Morgan, who was a custodian, and the fact that it was started with 130 million ounces is nothing more than a coincidence theory. But I did have to put that out because it's something that probably you don't talk to too many analysts that would give you that background. But obviously I can. And I think there's only one other thing to say besides you need to save in real money. And that is to be real with yourself. I mean, the idea is that we're here to help you. Oh, you're selling your own book. Oh, you're making a profit by sales. Anyone that's really real in this business owns a great deal of their own book. You guys own precious metals. How many of these stock salesmen own the stock that they're pushing?
Mm-hmm.
Not very many. I think the precious metals industry, like any industry, has some fruits, nuts, and flakes in it, but not very many. I think it's one of the more real industries when we get to your side of the business, meaning the bullion dealers, than probably a lot of industries that I can name. So, touche, you guys, I love being with you on these interviews. I hope I'm benefiting you and all of the listeners. And it's a simple thing. Turn your fiat into gold. You talked about alchemy, turning lead into gold. Lead's a real substance. Lead has value. Lead's used in batteries, and you can turn something of some value into something much more valuable. Fiat has really, in the real sense, no value whatsoever, and you can turn it into gold. I suggest highly that you consider that right now before you can't do that.
Yeah, fiat, no value. Yeah, that's good. I really love it, David. Okay, Darryl.
Well, at this point, I think it's emphasising what Jim Sinclair has always said, and we do refer to his comments regularly. And it supports everything that David has spoken about today and the points that you brought up, Brian. But why do central banks own gold? It's to back a failing currency. That's what it is. Because if you haven't got real money, you have nothing. And so if central banks do it and they don't own Bitcoin, they own gold.
They own gold.
So why wouldn't you do it? Why don't you become your own central bank, own gold, preserve your wealth, take control? It's really what you're doing when you buy gold. Egon von Greyer's. Egon talks about how much would you invest in precious metals? When he's asked the question, he says, whatever you can't afford to lose. I don't think there's been a more appropriate time for that response than Egon's right now. So I think we've given our viewers something to think about.
Yeah, food for thought.
Yeah, today, for sure. We'd like to think we have at least. David, like to thank you so much for the work you do at As Good as Gold Australia. Really appreciated. Your research is seriously significant, and you've been a wonderful support for As Good as Gold Australia, and we're looking forward to that continuing on and on. And As Good as Gold Australia get their message across in the process. Once again, please don't forget that promo. To be able to purchase gold at spot, we've broken loose all the shackles. We've ignored all of the historical pricing on gold. It's at spot right now, right up until the end of the month. So the opportunity is there to take advantage of that. To all of our viewers, subscribers who continually support this channel, we thank you so much for doing so, and suggest right now that you still continue to stay well, stay focused. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.